Her first memory wasn't of loving arms, but of the cold stone ledge where her parents had left her to die, her tiny, armless body exposed to scavengers and the merciless sun. Only the cry that escaped her infant throat, a sound that carried across the canyon to the ears of a lone Apache warrior, stood between Luna and certain death. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. In the shadow of the towering red cliffs of Eagle Canyon, Arizona Territory, 1878, a young woman named Martha Reynolds clutched a small bundle to her chest. The bundle squirmed and let out a soft whimper, but Martha's face remained hard as stone. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks in the dust that coated her pale skin. Her husband, Thomas, stood beside her, his jaw clenched tight, knuckles white around the reins of their horse. "It has to be done," he whispered, though his voice cracked with the weight of his words. "The preacher said it himself. A child like that. It's a sign, Martha. A punishment." The bundle in Martha's arms moved again, and a tiny face emerged from the threadbare blanket. The baby girl's eyes were wide and dark, her cheeks flushed pink from the early morning chill. Her small body ended at the shoulders, with no arms to reach for her mother's face. Luna, they had called her, born under the full moon 3 months prior. A beautiful name for a child they had prayed would be perfect. "I can't," Martha sobbed, pulling the child closer. "Thomas, please. She's our daughter." "She's a burden we can't bear," Thomas replied, his voice hardening with each word. "You heard what the townsfolk said. Crops failing, Johnson's son taking ill, the drought, all since she was born. The settlement can't afford any more bad luck." Martha knew the whispers that followed them in Willow Creek. The stares, the crossed fingers, the way mothers pulled their children away when she walked by with Luna. 3 months of isolation, 3 months of blame, 3 months of her husband growing colder and more distant as superstition took root in his mind. Thomas took the bundle from her arms before she could protest further. "The Navajos say this place is sacred," he muttered. "They say the spirits here take what belongs to them. She'll be with her own kind." Martha fell to her knees as Thomas carried their daughter to the edge of the precipice. The narrow ledge below was barely visible, a small outcropping of rock jutting from the cliff face. It was there he placed the bundle, carefully ensuring the baby wouldn't roll off immediately. Luna didn't cry, only gazed up at her father with dark eyes that seemed to hold no judgment, only confusion. "May God forgive us," Thomas whispered, then turned away. Martha's wails echoed through the canyon as they rode away, mingling with the cries of the hawks circling overhead. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to see the tiny shape growing smaller as they descended the trail that wound through the red rock formations. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the small bundle on the ledge. Luna finally began to cry, her tiny lungs pushing out sounds that echoed through the canyon walls. The sounds of abandonment, of hunger, of loneliness. Miles away, Nige paused in his tracks, his head tilting slightly as the wind carried a sound unlike any other. At 28, he was one of the most respected warriors of his band, known for his keen hearing and tracking skills. His hunting expedition had been successful. A young deer was slung over his shoulder, its weight familiar and comfortable. But the sound that reached his ears now made him set down his prize and turn toward the cliffs. It was not an animal's cry, it was a child. Nature had seen what the white settlers did with their unwanted ones. The elderly left to die when they couldn't keep up with wagon trains, the sick abandoned at makeshift camps during outbreaks, and sometimes the imperfect children, those born different, left for the desert to claim. His people would never do such a thing. Every child was sacred, every life valued regardless of its form. Even now in his band, there was an old man with twisted legs who was their most honored storyteller, and a young girl with one eye who could track better than warriors twice her age. The cry came again, weaker this time. Nietzsche's eyes narrowed as he calculated the distance. Eagle Canyon was sacred ground, a place of power. If a child had been left there, it was no accident. The white man's cruelty knows no bounds, he muttered to himself as he secured his kill in a tree and began to move toward the sound. But the spirits have led me to this cry for a reason. Indeed, the sun climbed higher as Nietzsche made his way toward Eagle Canyon, the child's cries guiding him like a beacon through the wilderness. The red walls of Eagle Canyon rose like ancient sentinels against the cloudless sky. Nietzsche moved with practiced silence, his feet finding purchase on the rocky terrain where others might slip and fall. The crying had grown fainter, more intermittent, which only quickened his pace. A dying cry was worse than a strong one. When he reached the rim of the canyon, Nietzsche scanned the vastness before him. The drop was sheer, hundreds of feet of vertical stone punctuated by occasional outcroppings and ledges. The sound seemed to come from below, carried upward by the swirling winds that danced between the canyon walls. Then he saw it, a small white bundle on a narrow ledge about 30 feet down. The bundle moved slightly, confirming his suspicions. A child, abandoned to the elements and the scavengers that would inevitably come. Nietzsche's jaw tightened. His people were at war with the white settlers, a conflict born of broken treaties and stolen lands. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let the white man's cruelty consume itself. But the cry that reached his ears spoke not of white or Apache, only of a human child in need. Foolishness, he muttered to himself as he uncoiled the rope from his waist and secured it to a sturdy juniper tree growing near the edge. Yet even as he spoke the word, his hands were already working, testing the strength of his lifeline. The descent was treacherous. Loose rocks gave way beneath his feet, tumbling into the abyss below. The rope cut into his palms as he lowered himself carefully, foot by foot, toward the narrow ledge. The child's cries had nearly stopped now, a bad sign. When his feet finally touched the ledge, Nietzsche crouched low, balancing his weight carefully on the precarious outcropping. The bundle lay still, and for a moment he feared he had arrived too late. Then it moved again, and a small face emerged from the folds of the thin blanket. The sight made even the seasoned warrior pause. The infant was tiny, likely no more than a few months old. Her face was red and streaked with dried tears, her dark eyes wide and exhausted from crying. But it was what he didn't see that made understanding dawn. Where there should have been arms extending from her shoulders, there was nothing. "So this is why they left you," Nietzsche said softly in his native tongue. "Because you were born different." The baby looked up at him, her crying subsiding to hiccuping sobs, as if relieved that someone had finally answered her calls. Nietzsche carefully unwrapped the blanket, confirming what he had seen. The child had been born without arms, her small body otherwise perfectly formed. Among his people, such a child would be considered touched by the spirits, perhaps destined to develop other gifts to compensate for what she lacked. But he knew the white man's ways were different. They feared what they did not understand, cast away what did not fit their notion of normal. Nietzsche rewrapped the child, tucking the blanket more securely around her small form. The sun was high now, beating down on the exposed ledge. The baby's skin was hot to the touch. She would not have survived much longer in the direct heat. "You have a strong spirit to have lived this long," he told her, a reluctant admiration in his voice. "The ancestors must have plans for you." Securing the child against his chest with one arm, Nietzsche began the difficult ascent. The climb was far more dangerous now that he only had one hand free to grip the rope, but he moved with determination, finding footholds where there seemed to be none, pulling himself and his tiny charge up inch by painful inch. When they finally reached the top, Nietzsche sat back on solid ground, breathing heavily from the exertion. The baby had fallen silent, her exhausted body limp against his chest, but she was alive. He could feel her heart beating, a rhythm that seemed to match his own. Nietzsche looked down at the child in his arms, this small, unwanted life that fate had placed in his path. "What am I to do with you now, little one without arms?" he asked softly. "Your people have cast you away, and mine would see you as the child of an enemy." The baby opened her eyes then, looking up at him with a gaze that held no fear, only trust. Something shifted in the warrior's heart, a decision forming that would change both their lives forever. Nietzsche gathered the child close as he made his way back to where he had left his hunt. The desert stretched before him, a vast expanse of reds and browns baking under the relentless sun. In his arms, the baby had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her breath coming in small, warm puffs against his chest. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them simple. To return the child to Willow Creek would likely mean her death, if not immediately, then slowly, through neglect or cruelty. The settlers who had left her to die would not welcome her return. To leave her with another white settlement might spare her life, but what kind of existence would await her? A life of pity and charity at best, of abuse and exploitation at worst, and to take her to his own people, that was perhaps the most complicated path of all. The Apache were at war, fighting for their very survival against those who sought to claim their lands, destroy their way of life. To bring a white child among them, even one so helpless, would be met with suspicion, perhaps even anger. There were those in his band who had lost children to the white man's diseases, to their bullets, to the harsh conditions of forced relocations. How could he ask them to open their hearts to the child of their enemy? Yet as he retrieved his deer and continued his journey home, Nietzsche found his decision already made, not through careful reasoning, but through the inexplicable bond that had formed the moment he held her on that precarious ledge. "I will call you Luna," he said to the sleeping child, remembering the scrap of cloth he had found sewn into her blanket. "It means moon in the white man's Spanish tongue, a fitting name, for you seem to have fallen from the sky into my path." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Nietzsche approached the hidden encampment of his band. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns among the pinyon pines, and children's laughter echoed off the nearby rock formations. His people had chosen this place carefully, a sheltered valley that offered protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Ahiga, one of the younger warriors tasked with watching the perimeter, was the first to spot him. The young man raised his hand in greeting, then froze when he noticed the bundle in Nietzsche's arms. "What is this you bring, brother?" Ahiga asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "A child," Nietzsche replied simply, "found abandoned in Eagle Canyon." Ahiga stepped closer, his face darkening as he caught a glimpse of the baby's pale skin. "A white child. Have you lost your senses? This can only bring trouble to our people." "She was left to die," Nietzsche said, his voice hardening. "Cast away because she was born without arms. Would you have me do the same?" Before Ahiga could respond, Kiona, the tribe's medicine woman, emerged from between the lodges. Though her hair was streaked with gray and her face lined with age, she moved with the grace of a much younger woman. Her dark eyes missed nothing. "I felt a change in the wind," she said, approaching them with steady steps. "Now I see why. You have brought us a spirit child, Nietzsche." "A white child," Ahiga corrected, his tone respectful but firm, one that should be returned to its own kind. Kiona reached out, silently asking permission to see the baby. Nietzsche carefully transferred Luna to the elder's arms, unwrapping the blanket to reveal her small form. The child awakened at the movement, her dark eyes blinking up at the new face hovering above her. Her own kind left her on a ledge in Eagle Canyon, Nietzsche explained, because of how she was born. Kiona examined the child carefully, her expression revealing nothing. The entire camp had gone quiet. The daily activities paused as people gathered at a distance, watching the unfolding scene with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "The white men fear difference," Kiona said at last. "They see it as weakness, as something to be eliminated. We know better." She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the gathered tribe members. "We know that those born different often carry the strongest medicine." From the crowd, a woman stepped forward. Talise, who had lost her husband and infant son to a settler's raid the previous winter. Her grief was still fresh, carved into the lines around her eyes and mouth. She approached slowly, her gaze fixed on the child in Kiona's arms. "Why should we care for one of theirs?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion, "when they show no mercy to ours?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to the thoughts many were having but had not spoken. Nietzsche felt the weight of their stares, the burden of his choice growing heavier by the moment. "Because we are not them," he answered simply. "We do not measure the value of life by its usefulness or its appearance. This child has survived against impossible odds. The spirits led me to her cry. Would you have me ignore their guidance?" Kiona nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "The child was abandoned on sacred ground. That is no coincidence. She has been given to us for a reason." The tribal council gathered that evening around the central fire, flames casting long shadows across solemn faces. Luna slept peacefully in Kiona's lodge, watched over by two young girls who had immediately been drawn to the strange baby with her missing limbs and pale skin. Outside, the elders debated her fate. Chief Nkosi, his face weathered by decades of sun and struggle, listened intently as voices rose and fell around the circle. The debate was heated, opinions divided. "She will bring the white soldiers down upon us," warned Apache, a warrior whose family had been decimated by a cavalry attack 3 summers past. "They will claim we stole their child." "The same white men who left her to die?" Nietzsche countered, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "They wanted her gone. They will not come looking." Talise, who had earlier questioned the decision, now sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Something had shifted in her when she'd held the child briefly, felt the warmth of that small body against her own. The emptiness inside her remained, but alongside it, something new had begun to take root. "I will care for her," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the debate. "My arms are empty. Let me fill them with this child the spirits have sent." A silence fell over the circle. Even Chief Nkosi seemed surprised by the offer. "You would raise the child of those who took your own?" he asked gently. Talise raised her chin. "I would raise a child who needs a mother. Is that not our way? To see the soul, not the shell that houses it?" Kiona nodded approvingly from her place beside the chief. "The girl has strong medicine. I have felt it. She was born different for a reason." Chief Nkosi was quiet for a long moment, weighing the words spoken, the risks, the possibilities. Finally, he raised his hand, signaling his decision. "The child will stay," he declared. "She will be called Luna, as Nietzsche has named her, but she will also receive a name in our tongue when the time is right. Talise will be her mother, Nietzsche her protector, as it was he who heard her cry and brought her to us." His eyes, sharp despite his years, moved from face to face around the circle. "Any who cannot accept this decision are free to speak now." No one spoke, though Enepe's jaw remained tight, his disapproval clear in the rigid set of his shoulders. "It is decided then," the chief concluded. "May the spirits guide us in this new path." As the council dispersed, Nietzsche approached Talise, who had risen to return to Kiona's lodge where Luna slept. "Thank you," he said simply. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the dying fire. I do not do this for you, warrior. I do it for myself and for the child. But know this, if danger comes to our people because of her, I will not stand in the way of whatever must be done." Naich nodded. It was fair and more than he had hoped for. "I understand, and I give you my word, I will protect both you and Luna with my life." A ghost of a smile touched Talice's lips. "We will see what the dawn brings," she said, then turned to retrieve her new daughter. The days that followed brought challenges none had anticipated. Luna, accustomed to cow's milk from her birth mother, initially refused the deer milk Talise offered. She grew weak, her cries becoming feeble, until Kiona found a wild goat whose milk the baby accepted. The women fashioned special cradle boards that would secure Luna without arms to hold onto the sides, and Talise learned to read the child's needs from subtle changes in her expression rather than the gestures other infants used. Through it all, Naiche watched from a distance, respecting Talise's role as Luna's new mother, but remaining ever vigilant. He brought the best portions of his hunts to their lodge, carved small wooden toys that Luna could manipulate with her feet, and stood guard when strangers approached the camp. By the time the moon had completed a full cycle, Luna's place in the tribe had begun to solidify. The children, naturally adaptable, accepted her presence without question, fascinated by her differences rather than repelled by them. The women incorporated her care into their daily routines, taking turns watching her when Talise needed rest. Even Enepe, still wary, could be seen occasionally making funny faces at Luna when he thought no one was watching. But the greatest transformation was in Talise herself. The grief that had hollowed her out began to fill with purpose. She sang to Luna in the early mornings, ancient songs of her people, teaching the child their rhythms and cadences. She spoke to her constantly in their language, determined that Luna would grow up understanding the words of her adopted tribe. And at night, she told stories of great warriors and wise women, of creation and harmony, of the balance of all living things. "You are a bridge, little one," she whispered one evening as Luna drifted to sleep. "Between what was and what could be, between hatred and understanding. I do not yet know why the spirits placed you in our path, but I will help you find your way." In her sleep, Luna smiled, a small handless arm moving slightly, as if reaching for something only she could see. Outside their lodge, Naiche stood silent guard, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp. The decision had been made, Luna accepted, but he knew better than most that acceptance within their tribe was only the first challenge. The world beyond, the world of white settlers with their fear and guns, of cavalry soldiers with their orders and contempt, that world would pose threats he could not yet foresee. 5 winters passed, seasons turning like the great wheel of the sky. Luna grew from a helpless infant into a spirited young child, with a will as strong as the mountains that sheltered the tribe. Her dark eyes, inquisitive and bright, missed nothing, and her laughter rang through the camp like birdsong. What she lacked in arms, Luna made up for with remarkable dexterity in her feet and toes. Talise had recognized early the child's determination to be independent and had adapted traditional teachings to Luna's unique abilities. While other children learned to string beads with their fingers, Luna worked them with her toes, creating patterns just as intricate. When others practiced with small bows, Luna developed her own method, using her feet to hold and draw while bracing against a tree for support. "Look, Mother!" Luna called out one spring morning, her voice filled with pride. She sat on a flat rock near their lodge, a small clay pot between her feet. Using her toes with incredible precision, she was painting designs on the pottery, lines and swirls that mimicked the patterns Talise had taught her. "Beautiful, my little moon," Talise answered, her heart swelling with pride. "Your hands that are not hands create wonders." It was how she always referred to Luna's feet, hands that are not hands, teaching the girl from the beginning that different did not mean less. That adaptation was its own form of strength. Luna beamed at the praise, then returned to her work, her face a mask of concentration. At 5, her features had begun to mature, revealing a delicate beauty that blended her birth heritage with the influences of her upbringing. Her skin, still lighter than those around her, had bronzed from years under the Arizona sun. Her black hair, worn in 2 long braids decorated with beads and feathers, caught the light as she bent over her task. Across the camp, Naiche observed the scene with quiet satisfaction. The child he had rescued had become a valued member of their community, her spirit and determination earning respect even from those who had initially resisted her presence. He still maintained his role as her protector, though the nature of that protection had evolved. Now it was less about physical safety and more about ensuring she had the opportunity to find her place in the world. "She grows strong," said Chief Nkosi, who had approached silently to stand beside Naiche. The old man's health had begun to fail over the past year, but his eyes were still sharp, his mind clear. "Yes," Naiche agreed, "stronger than many with 2 arms." Nkosi nodded, watching as Luna finished her painting and carefully set the pot aside to dry. The time approaches when she must receive her true name. I have consulted with Kiona. The next full moon will be appropriate. Naiche felt a mixture of pride and concern at the chief's words. A naming ceremony was a significant milestone, a formal recognition of Luna's place in the tribe. Yet it also marked a transition, an acknowledgement that the child was growing into awareness of herself and her place in the world. "She has begun to ask questions," Naiche said quietly, "about why she looks different, about where she came from." "And what have you told her?" "The truth. That she was given to us by the spirits, that her birth parents could not see her value." Nkosi was silent for a moment, his weathered hand gripping his walking stick more tightly. "The truth is a good foundation, but there are harder truths ahead. The white settlements grow closer each season. Traders bring news of more soldiers, more families pushing westward." Naiche's jaw tightened. They had been fortunate these past years. Their band had remained relatively undisturbed in their hidden valley, but reports from other Apache groups told of increasing conflicts, of broken treaties and forced relocations. "We cannot hide her forever," Nkosi continued, "nor should we. She walks between 2 worlds, whether she yet knows it or not. That will be both her burden and her gift." Before Naiche could respond, a commotion near the edge of the camp drew their attention. Ahiga, now one of their most trusted scouts, had returned from patrol and was speaking urgently to a group of warriors. Naiche moved quickly toward them, Nkosi following at a slower pace. Luna, noticing the activity, set aside her pottery and used her remarkable agility to move toward the gathering, curious as always. "White men," Ahiga reported as Naiche joined the circle. "A small party, 5 or 6, moving along the eastern ridge. They appear to be surveyors, marking the land." A ripple of tension moved through the assembled men. Surveyors were often the first harbingers of encroachment. Where they went, settlers and soldiers inevitably followed. "How close?" Naiche asked. "Too close," Ahiga replied grimly. "If they continue their current path, they will discover the hidden pass that leads to our valley within a day, maybe 2. Enape, who had gradually come to accept Luna's presence but remained one of the most militant regarding defense of their territory, spoke up. "We should eliminate the threat now, before they can report back." Luna had reached the edge of the gathering, listening intently. Though only 5, she understood more than the adults sometimes realized. She knew what white men meant, people who looked more like her than like her tribe, people who might have answers to questions that had begun to form in her young mind. "No," she said suddenly, her clear voice cutting through the men's discussion. "No killing." All eyes turned to her, some surprised, others concerned that she had interrupted a warrior's council, but Luna held her ground, meeting each gaze without flinching. "They might be like me," she continued, her Apache fluent but occasionally marked by unique phrasings that reflected her distinctive perspective. "Maybe they don't all think the same. Maybe some are good." Silence fell over the group. For many, it was the first time they had truly confronted the reality that Luna would one day have to reconcile her Apache upbringing with her white heritage. The innocence of her early childhood was giving way to a more complex awareness that would only grow with time. Chief Nokosi raised his hand, silencing the murmurs that had broken out following Luna's words. His eyes, clouded with age but still penetrating, rested on the young girl standing fearlessly before the council of warriors. "Even the smallest voice carries wisdom when the spirits speak through it," he said. "We will not rush to bloodshed. Naiche, take 3 warriors and observe these surveyors. Learn their purpose, their movements. We will decide our course after we have more knowledge." Enape opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, deferring to the chief's authority. But his glance toward Luna held a mixture of frustration and something deeper, a grudging respect for her courage. Naiche nodded, already selecting in his mind which warriors would accompany him. "We will leave at once." As the men dispersed to prepare, Talise approached Luna, her expression stern but her eyes soft with understanding. "You spoke out of turn, daughter. A child does not interrupt the warrior's council." Luna lowered her head slightly, acknowledging the correction. "I am sorry, mother, but I could not stay silent when lives were being decided." Talise sighed, kneeling to be at eye level with her daughter. "Your heart speaks with honor, but there are proper ways, proper times. You must learn patience alongside courage." She touched Luna's cheek gently. "Come now, we must prepare for your naming ceremony. The men will handle the matter of the strangers." The following days passed in a state of controlled tension. Naiche and his small party tracked the surveyors, observing from hiding places as the white men measured distances, noted landmarks, and made sketches in leather-bound books. As Ahiga had predicted, they came dangerously close to discovering the hidden pass, but ultimately veered southward, following a promising vein of quartz that glittered in the sunlight. When Naiche returned to report that the immediate danger had passed, the relief in the camp was palpable. The timing seemed auspicious, the threat receding just as Luna's naming ceremony approached with the full moon. Preparations intensified. Talise and the other women crafted a special dress for Luna, adorned with beads and porcupine quills, in patterns that represented strength and vision. Luna's excitement grew with each passing day, her questions becoming more frequent, more profound. "Will my new name tell me who I truly am?" she asked Kiona, who was teaching her to identify healing plants. The old medicine woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "A name does not tell you who you are, child. It suggests who you might become. The rest is for you to discover." On the night of the ceremony, the tribe gathered in a circle around the central fire. Luna sat on a special mat woven by Talise, her formal dress gleaming in the firelight. Despite her obvious nervousness, she held herself with dignity, her back straight, her eyes clear and focused. Chief Nokosi began the ritual by recounting the story of how Luna had come to their people. Found on a precipice, abandoned by those who could not see her value, brought by Naiche, who heard her cry when others would have passed by. He spoke of how she had grown among them, learning their ways, bringing joy and perspective that enriched their community. "A child born without arms might seem limited to those with small vision," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "But we have seen this one paint with her feet, ride a horse, using only her legs and voice, string beads more delicately than many can with fingers. She has shown us that limitation exists only in the mind, not in the body or spirit." He beckoned Luna forward. She rose gracefully and approached the chief, moving with the distinctive gait she had developed over the years, balanced, purposeful, proud. Kiona joined them, carrying a small bowl of sacred pigment. Using her thumb, she painted a symbol on Luna's forehead, a rising sun with rays extending outward. "From this night forward," Chief Nkosi declared, "this child will be known among our people as Nitika, she who brings new vision. May she continue to see what others miss, to teach us to look beyond what seems to be to what truly is." The tribe responded with a unified voice of acceptance, and the celebration began. Drums beating, voices singing, dancers moving around the fire in intricate patterns that told stories of their people's history and beliefs. Luna, now also Nitika, watched with shining eyes, absorbing every detail, feeling for the first time a sense of true belonging. Yet even in this moment of acceptance and joy, questions lingered in her heart. Who were the people who had given her birth? Why had they feared her differences enough to leave her to die? And what did it mean that there were others who looked like her, so close now that they threatened her adopted people's safety? As the celebration continued around her, Nietzsche approached, kneeling beside her with a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "A gift," he said simply, placing it before her. "For Nitika, who brings new vision." With practiced dexterity, Luna unwrapped the bundle using her feet. Inside lay brushes of various sizes, small pots of pigment ground from colored stones, and several pieces of smooth bark prepared as painting surfaces. "Kiona says you see the world differently," Nietzsche explained. "Perhaps you can show us what you see through these." Tears welled in Luna's eyes as she looked up at the warrior who had saved her life, and who now offered her a new way to express her growing understanding of the world around her. "Thank you, Uncle Nietzsche," she whispered. "I will try to see with clear eyes and show with honest hands that are not hands." 7 more winters passed, each one bringing new growth and change to Luna, now known among the tribe as Nitika. At 12, she had blossomed into a young woman whose artistic gifts had become legendary, not only within her tribe, but among neighboring bands who traded for her distinctive paintings. Her technique had evolved from simple designs to complex scenes that captured the essence of Apache life. Hunters moving silently through forests, women grinding corn beside flowing streams, children dancing beneath star-filled skies. Using her feet with extraordinary precision, she mixed pigments from plants, minerals, and clay that Kiona helped her gather, creating colors that seemed to pulse with life on the bark, hide, and stone surfaces she worked upon. "Your spirit speaks through your art," Kiona told her one afternoon as they collected yellow ochre from a hillside deposit. The medicine woman, now stooped with age, leaned heavily on a walking stick. "You see with more than eyes." Nitika nodded thoughtfully, securing the ochre in a small pouch using her toes. "Sometimes when I paint, it's as if my hands that are not hands know what to do before my mind does. The images come from somewhere deep inside." It was a gift that had earned her respect far beyond what might have been expected for a girl of her unusual circumstances. Even Enapai, who had once viewed her presence as a threat, now proudly wore a leather band painted with her distinctive markings, claiming it brought him success in hunting. But with maturity came greater awareness of the complexities that surrounded her existence. Nitika had begun to notice the subtle differences in how she was treated when traders from other tribes visited. The curious glances, the occasional whispered comments about her pale skin and missing arms. She understood now that she was neither fully Apache nor fully white, but something in between, a bridge between worlds that increasingly seemed destined for collision. The white settlements continued to expand. What had once been distant threats were now established towns with names like Copper Springs and Redemption, places where the Apache were unwelcome except to trade under carefully controlled circumstances. Stories filtered back to the tribe of other native peoples being forced onto reservations, restricted lands where soldiers monitored their movements and missionaries worked to erase their traditional ways. "Why do they fear us so?" Nitika asked Talise one evening as they sat outside their lodge, watching the sunset paint the cliffs in shades of orange and gold. "We take only what we need from the land. We honor the balance of all things." Talise's face, now showing lines of middle age, remained serene, though her eyes held sadness. "They do not understand our ways, just as many of our people do not understand theirs. Fear grows in the space between understanding." Nitika was quiet for a moment, considering this. "The people who left me to die, they feared what they did not understand. My difference." It wasn't a question, but Talise nodded anyway, reaching out to stroke her daughter's hair. "Yes, but remember that fear is a teacher, not a final judgment. Some learn from it, grow beyond it. Others remain trapped within it." "And which are we?" Nitika asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Talise could answer, commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand, voices raised in alarm. Naiche, now a senior warrior and respected voice in the council, moved quickly toward Chief Nkosi's lodge. Nitika and Talise followed, joining the growing crowd. The cause of the disruption soon became clear. Ahiga had returned from a hunting expedition with grave news. A group of white soldiers had captured several young men from a neighboring Apache band, who had been fishing along the river that marked the unofficial boundary between their territory and the settlements. "They accused them of stealing cattle," Ahiga reported, his face taut with controlled anger. "The soldiers planned to hang them at sunrise as an example." Outrage rippled through the crowd. Chief Nkosi, now very old and rarely seen outside his lodge, emerged leaning heavily on a younger relative. Despite his frailty, his voice carried authority. "How many soldiers?" he asked. 8, stationed at the new outpost near Thunder Creek," Ahiga replied. "They have the young men in a holding pen beside their camp. There are also 2 settlers with them, trappers, I think." Naiche stepped forward. "We must free our brothers. With surprise on our side, we can strike before dawn, when their guard is lowest." Murmurs of agreement rose from the warriors, but Nitika moved forward, unable to remain silent. "Wait," she said, her voice clear and steady. "This could be a trap. What if they expect us to attack? What if they want an excuse to bring more soldiers to our lands?" The crowd fell silent, many eyes turning to her with surprise. Though respected for her art and known for her insight, it was unusual for a young woman, especially one of her unique status, to speak in a council of war. Naiche looked at her with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "What would you suggest, Nitika? That we leave our brothers to die?" She met his gaze without flinching. "No, but perhaps there is another way. One that doesn't risk bringing destruction to all our people." "Speak then," Chief Nkosi said, gesturing for her to continue. "Let us hear this other way." Nitika took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "The white men fear what they do not understand, but they also feel curiosity toward it. My paintings, traders have told me that white settlers pay high prices for them, not knowing they are made by Apache hands, much less by feet." She paused, gathering her thoughts, then continued with growing confidence. "Let me go to them. A girl with no arms is a curiosity, not a threat. I can claim to be a traveler, separated from my party. While they are distracted by my presence, by my difference, our warriors can move into position unseen." A shocked silence followed her words. Talise stepped forward, her face pale with fear. "No, I will not risk losing you to them." "It is too dangerous," Nietzsche agreed. "If they discover your connection to us—" "They won't," Nitika interrupted. "I can speak as they do. I have listened carefully to the traders, practiced their tongue when alone." She switched to halting English, startling many present who had never heard her speak the white man's language. "I can be what they expect, a lost white girl, strange but harmless." Chief Nkosi studied her intently, his ancient eyes seeming to look beyond her words to the deeper currents of her intent. "Why would you take such a risk, daughter of our people?" Nitika looked around at the faces surrounding her, the only family, the only home she had ever known. "Because I stand between two worlds. Perhaps that is why the spirits led Nietzsche to find me. Not just so I could be saved, but so I could help save others when the time came." Dawn had not yet broken when Nitika stood at the edge of the Apache camp, dressed in a simple buckskin dress with minimal adornment. Her hair, normally worn in traditional braids, had been brushed loose around her shoulders in the style favored by white women. Talise had helped her prepare with trembling hands, every movement conveying her fear and reluctance. "You do not have to do this," she whispered one last time as she adjusted the small pack secured to Nitika's back, containing food, water, and a few of her smaller paintings. "I do, Mother," Nitika replied with quiet determination. "It is the path that opens before me." Nietzsche approached, leading a gentle mare, the most docile in their small herd. They had practiced for hours the previous evening, perfecting the way Nitika could mount and ride without arms, using only her legs and verbal commands to control the animal. "Remember," he said gravely, "we will be watching, always within reach. If you raise your voice in our signal, we will come for you immediately." Nitika nodded, her face composed despite the fear fluttering in her chest. This would be her first direct encounter with white people, the race of her birth, yet strangers in every way that mattered. "The soldiers' camp is 2 hours' ride to the east," Nietzsche continued. "Our warriors are already moving into position in the hills surrounding it. Wait for the sun to be fully above the horizon before you approach. Appear confused, lost." "I understand." She allowed him to help her mount, settling securely on the horse's back. With a slight pressure of her knees, she guided the mare in a small circle, demonstrating her control. Chief Nkosi emerged from his lodge, moving slowly with the assistance of Kiona. The old leader raised his hand in blessing. "May the spirits guide you, Nitika. May they blind your enemies to your purpose and sharpen your vision when paths become unclear." With a final look at the faces of those she loved, Talise's tear-streaked cheeks, Nietzsche's stoic concern, the chief's quiet dignity, Nitika nudged her horse forward and rode into the lightening darkness. The journey seemed both endless and too brief. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with pale gold light, she rehearsed her story, a missionary's daughter separated from her traveling party during a storm, wandering for days. Her disability would explain why she hadn't been able to make fire or adequately fend for herself. The paintings in her pack would serve as proof of her harmlessness. Surely a young, armless girl who created art could pose no threat. The soldier's outpost came into view as she crested a small rise, a crude wooden structure with a corral beside it. She could make out men moving about, morning routines underway. In a separate pen, as Ahiga had reported, several figures sat huddled together, the captured Apache youth. Nitika took a deep breath, centered herself, then slumped forward on her horse, allowing her hair to fall across her face. She guided the mare down the slope with subtle pressure from her legs, heading directly toward the outpost at an unsteady pace that suggested exhaustion. The reaction was immediate. A sentry spotted her, called out in alarm. Men emerged from the structure, rifles raised cautiously. The mare continued forward at Nitika's subtle urging. "Halt!" a voice commanded when she was within 30 yards. Nitika raised her head weakly, letting them see her face, young female, tear-streaked from wind and strategic crying. "Help!" she called in English, her voice cracking. "Please help me." Confusion replaced wariness as the soldiers registered her appearance, particularly her missing arms. Two men approached cautiously, weapons still raised. "Who are you, girl? Where'd you come from?" The speaker was a weathered man with sergeant stripes and a thick mustache. "Emily," she replied, using the name she had chosen for her false identity. "Emily Graham. My father is a missionary. We were traveling to the settlement at Copper Springs when there was a storm. I got separated." She let her voice trail off, her body swaying slightly as if about to faint. The sergeant motioned to another soldier who hurried forward to help her dismount. His hands were rough but not unkind as he lifted her from the horse, his eyes widening as he fully registered her armless condition. "Bring her inside," the sergeant ordered. "Get her some water." Nitika allowed herself to be led into the outpost, acutely aware of the stares following her. From the corner of her eye, she observed the Apache prisoners watching her with carefully neutral expressions. They wouldn't recognize her specifically, but they would know from her features that she was not fully white. She prayed they would have the wisdom to remain silent. Inside the wooden structure, a crude table and several chairs occupied the center of a single room. Maps were spread across one wall and supplies were stacked in corners. The sergeant pulled out a chair and the younger soldier helped Nitika sit. "How long you been out there, girl?" the sergeant asked, his voice gruff but not hostile. 3 days, I think," she answered, adding a slight tremor to her voice. "I've tried to follow the sun west toward Copper Springs, but I'm not sure if I've been going in circles." A canteen was pressed to her lips, and she drank gratefully, using the moment to scan the room, counting men, noting weapons. 6 soldiers inside, 2 more visible through the doorway watching the prisoners. 8 total, as Ahiga had reported. "And your father? The rest of your party?" "I don't know," she said, letting genuine tears well in her eyes. "There were 5 of us, father, me, our guide, and 2 assistants. The storm scattered us. Father will be looking for me, I'm sure." The sergeant exchanged glances with another man, older and dressed in civilian clothes, one of the trappers Ahiga had mentioned. "Mighty dangerous for a girl like you to be wandering alone in these parts," the trapper said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Especially one with your condition." Nitika ducked her head. "I was born this way, sir. The Lord saw fit to test me, father says." "A missionary's daughter," the sergeant mused. He seemed to be relaxing, her story apparently plausible enough. "Well, we can't send you back out there. We'll take you to Copper Springs when we've concluded our business here." The trapper was still studying her, something like suspicion flickering in his gaze. "What's in that pack you're carrying?" Nitika felt a flash of anxiety, but kept her expression innocent. "Just some food and water, and my paintings." "Paintings?" The trapper's eyebrows rose, genuine curiosity momentarily replacing suspicion. "How does a girl with no arms paint?" The sergeant shot him a reproving glance. "Jenkins, show some respect." Nitika recognized the opportunity presenting itself. "It's all right," she said softly. "I'm used to the question. I paint with my feet. Would you like to see?" The trapper nodded, curiosity now fully engaged. Nitika maneuvered herself to retrieve her pack, a process she deliberately made more awkward than necessary, playing into their expectations of helplessness. Using her feet with well-practiced dexterity, she opened the pack and removed several small paintings on bark, scenes of desert sunsets, mountain vistas, and flowing streams rendered in vibrant natural pigments. The men gathered around, expressions of skepticism transforming into amazement as they examined her work. "These are remarkable," the sergeant said, genuinely impressed. "And you truly made these with your feet." "I'd pay good money for art like this," another soldier commented, carefully holding a painting of an eagle soaring above canyon walls. Nitika saw their defenses lowering, exactly as she had hoped. She glanced out the doorway, noting the position of the sun. By now, Nietzsche and the others would be in position, waiting for her signal or for the right moment to strike. "I could show you how I do it," she offered, her voice innocent but her mind calculating. "If you have any paper and something to draw with?" The sergeant nodded to one of his men, who produced a small notebook and pencil from a satchel. The soldiers cleared space on the table, and Nitika took the seat before it, aware that every eye in the room was now fixed on her. "I need to remove my moccasins," she explained, using her toes to untie the laces. The men watched, fascinated, as she exposed her feet. The toes, longer and more flexible than most, developed through years of using them in place of hands. With deliberate grace, she took the pencil between her toes and began to sketch. She chose to draw the view from the doorway, the mountains in the distance, the scattered trees. As she worked, she engaged them in conversation, knowing that the more distracted they were, the better chance the warriors had of moving into position undetected. "Have you men been stationed here long?" she asked casually. "About 3 months," the sergeant replied, his eyes still fixed on her moving foot. "Supposed to maintain order in the territory, keep an eye on the Apache troublemakers." "Like those men outside?" Nitika kept her tone curious, innocent. The sergeant's expression hardened slightly. "Cattle thieves, got to make an example." The trapper, Jenkins, had been circling around, studying her from different angles. His suspicion seemed to have faded, replaced by a calculating interest. "You know, girl, there'd be plenty who'd pay to see someone like you paint. Traveling shows, exhibitions, you could make a fortune." Nitika kept her expression neutral, though internally she recoiled at the thought of being displayed as a curiosity. "My father says my gift is from God, to be used for his glory, not for spectacle." A younger soldier, barely more than a boy, leaned forward eagerly. "Can I keep this drawing when you're done, miss, to send home to my mother?" "Of course," she replied with a gentle smile, seeing in his face a reminder that not all white men were enemies. Many were just young men far from home, following orders they might not fully understand. As she continued to draw, she subtly shifted position to get a better view of the prisoners outside. They were watching her now, their expressions carefully controlled, but their eyes alert. They had realized something was happening, though they couldn't know what. The trapper suddenly snapped his fingers. "I just remembered, there was talk in Copper Springs about a missionary party that got hit by Apache raiders 2 weeks back. Man named Graham was mentioned. That wouldn't be your father, would it?" A chill ran down Nitika's spine, but she kept her expression concerned rather than alarmed. "My father is Reverend Samuel Graham. Has something happened to him?" The trapper's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. Because the Graham they mentioned was traveling with his wife and son. No daughter was reported, especially not one with missing arms. That's something folks would have mentioned." The room grew silent. The sergeant looked up from the drawing, his gaze now sharp and suspicious. "I think you'd better explain yourself, girl," he said, his hand moving to rest on his pistol. Nitika's mind raced. Her deception was unraveling faster than she had anticipated. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. Not yet the position they had agreed would be the signal for attack. She needed more time. "My father doesn't speak of me to strangers," she said, injecting a note of shame into her voice. "He considers my condition a burden, a test from God. I travel separately sometimes with our guide to avoid embarrassing him when he meets important people." The sergeant seemed momentarily uncertain, but the trapper wasn't convinced. "Let me see your hair," he demanded suddenly. "My hair?" Nitika repeated, confused. "Pull it back from your face, all of it." Understanding dawned. He was looking for signs of her mixed heritage, features that might be more apparent when her hair didn't partially obscure her face. With deliberate slowness, she used her foot to brush her hair back, revealing her face fully. The trapper leaned in, studying her intently. "You've got the look," he said finally. "Not full-blooded white. Something else mixed in." His voice hardened. "Apache, maybe." The sergeant straightened, his hand now firmly on his weapon. "Is that true, girl? Are you some kind of half-breed spy?" The younger soldier looked confused, glancing between Nitika and his superiors. "But Sergeant, she speaks like a white woman. And those paintings—" "Shut up, Cooper," the sergeant snapped. Nitika knew the moment of pretense had passed. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her gaze to meet the sergeant's, letting him see for the first time the strength and dignity she had concealed beneath her vulnerable facade. "I am Nitika of the Crow Wing Apache," she said clearly, switching to her native language before returning to English. "Daughter of Talis, found and raised by the people you call enemies. And I am not a spy. I am a bridge between worlds that need not be at war." Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. The sergeant's face hardened, his hand now drawing his pistol. The other soldiers shifted nervously, weapons at the ready. Only the young soldier, Cooper, seemed reluctant, his eyes still fixed on Nitika's drawing with a mixture of confusion and wonder. "You've made a grave mistake coming here, girl," the sergeant said coldly. "Apache sympathizers hang just as quick as Apache thieves in this territory." Nitika remained calm, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Before you decide my fate, may I show you one more thing?" Without waiting for permission, she used her foot to reach back into her pack, extracting her most precious painting, one she had created specifically for this moment. It was a scene rendered on a piece of smooth bark, showing Apache and white children playing together beside a river, watched over by adults from both cultures. Behind them, mountains and plains stretched toward a shared horizon. The artistry was extraordinary, the symbolism unmistakable. "I was born to your people," Nitika said quietly, "but abandoned because I was different, left to die on a ledge in Eagle Canyon because my arms never grew. The Apache found me, saved me, raised me. They saw value where others saw only imperfection." She met each man's eyes in turn. Those young men outside, they weren't stealing cattle. They were retrieving animals that wandered across unmarked boundaries, animals their families had raised. The sergeant's expression didn't change, but he hadn't given the order to seize her yet, which gave her hope. "Pretty words and pretty pictures don't change the facts. They're thieves, and you're either confused or a traitor to your own kind." "My own kind?" Nitika's voice grew stronger. "Which kind is that, Sergeant? Those who left me to die or those who taught me to live? The color of my skin or the language of my heart?" From outside came the sound of a bird call, not a natural one, but the signal from nature that the warriors were in position. It was time. Nitika straightened in her chair, dignity radiating from her posture. "Your men are surrounded," she said calmly. 20 warriors in the hills, arrows nocked, rifles aimed. They could have attacked at dawn, killed you all in your sleep. Instead, they sent me to talk, to find a path without bloodshed. The sergeant glanced toward the windows, his face paling slightly as he registered shadows moving among the distant trees, shapes that hadn't been there moments before. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Test me if you wish," Nitika replied. "But first, hear my proposal. Release the young men to return to their families. In exchange, I will remain here as assurance that no Apache from our band will trouble your outpost or the nearby settlements." Jenkins, the trapper, laughed harshly. "And why would we trust the word of Apache raiders?" Nitika turned her steady gaze to him. "Because unlike you, they have never broken a promise to me." She nodded toward her paintings spread across the table. I offer something else as well. Teaching, sharing. My art can be a bridge between your world and mine. The people of Copper Springs would pay for these paintings. You said it yourself. Let me be the connection between communities that need not be enemies. The young soldier, Cooper, stepped forward hesitantly. Sergeant, maybe we should listen. My pa always said the Indian wars would never end until somebody started talking instead of shooting. For a long moment, the sergeant stood frozen in indecision, the pistol still in his hand. Then slowly, deliberately, he returned it to his holster. Jenkins, release the Apache boys, he ordered. You can't be serious, the trapper protested. I'm not dying today, and neither are my men, the sergeant replied grimly. Not over some cattle. He turned back to Nitika. Your people withdraw first, then we'll release the prisoners, then we talk. Nitika inclined her head in acknowledgement, hiding her relief behind a composed expression. She moved to the doorway, raising her voice in the Apache tongue, calling out the agreement. From the hillsides came responding calls. Agreement, but with warning. They would withdraw, but remain watchful. What followed was a tense choreography of mutual distrust, warriors melting back into the trees, soldiers unlocking the pen that held the young Apache men, each side keeping weapons ready but pointed downward. The released prisoners moved swiftly away, casting wondering glances at Nitika as they passed. When it was done, only Nitika remained, standing between the retreating Apache and the outpost. Nietzsche emerged briefly from the tree line, a question in his stance. I'm staying, Nitika called to him in their language. This is the bridge I was meant to build. Nietzsche's face showed pain, but also understanding. He raised his hand in acknowledgement, then disappeared into the shadows. In the days that followed, a strange truce took shape. Nitika remained at the outpost, sleeping in a small tent erected for her privacy, spending her days creating art that the soldiers began to collect and admire. She told them stories of Apache life, correcting misconceptions, explaining customs. In return, they taught her about the settlements, about the changes sweeping across the territory. Young Cooper proved an eager student of her foot painting technique, revealing an artistic talent of his own. The sergeant maintained his gruff exterior, but began to consult her before sending patrols, asking which areas were sacred to the Apache, which routes would least likely cause conflict. Word of the armless white girl living with the soldiers spread quickly. Visitors began arriving from Copper Springs and other settlements. Curious at first, then genuinely interested in her art, her story, her unique perspective, spanning two worlds. 3 months after her arrival at the outpost, Nitika sat beneath a ramada the soldiers had built for her, surrounded by a group of white and Mexican children from Copper Springs. Using her feet, she demonstrated how to mix pigments from natural materials, how to apply them to create images that told stories without words. From the edge of the gathering, Talise watched with quiet pride, her first visit to the outpost made possible by the fragile trust Nitika had begun to establish. Beside her stood the sergeant, his posture still military straight, but his expression thoughtful. She is remarkable, he acknowledged. In all my years on the frontier, I've never seen anything like what she's accomplishing here. Talise nodded, her eyes never leaving her daughter. The elders say she was born without arms so her spirit could reach farther, she replied through the interpreter who had accompanied her. Now I understand what they meant. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in purples and golds, Nitika sat with her mother beside a small fire, savoring these precious moments together. Are you certain of this path, my daughter? Talise asked softly. Living between worlds is not an easy fate. Nitika smiled, watching the sparks rise toward the emerging stars. I was born to one world, raised by another, and now I stand at the threshold of something new. Each day is difficult, yes, There are those on both sides who resist, who cling to old hatreds, but there are also those who listen, who see possibility instead of threat. She used her foot to add a small stick to the fire. I remember what you taught me. That limitation exists only in the mind. Perhaps the greatest limitation has been our inability to see each other clearly across the divide of fear. In the years that followed, the outpost at Thunder Creek evolved into something unprecedented. A trading post where Apache and settler could meet in relative peace, where commerce and conversation gradually replaced suspicion. Nitika's paintings became renowned throughout the territory, her distinct foot-created style immediately recognizable and increasingly valuable. When Chief Nkosi passed to the spirit world, his final words to her had been a blessing. "You have found your true name's purpose, Nitika. You have indeed brought new vision where blindness once ruled." The path wasn't straight or simple. There were setbacks, moments of violence and renewed distrust, times when Nitika wondered if her dream of harmony was merely a child's fantasy. But with each painting, each story shared, each misunderstanding corrected, small changes took root. On her 20th birthday, Nitika stood on the rim of Eagle Canyon, gazing down at the narrow ledge where her life had begun in abandonment. Naiche stood beside her, his hair now streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of guarding the delicate peace she had helped to forge. "Do you ever wonder about them?" he asked. "The ones who left you here?" Nitika was quiet for a moment, watching an eagle soar through the vastness below. "I used to," she admitted. "I imagined confronting them, asking why. But with time, I've come to understand that their greatest gift to me was letting me go." She smiled, turning away from the precipice to face the future. "They left me because I had no arms, but in doing so, they gave me wings." Together, they walked back toward the settlement that had grown along Thunder Creek, no longer simply Apache or white, but something new emerging from the union of different worlds. Children played together in the dusty streets, their games a blend of cultures. Women worked side by side, sharing techniques for weaving, cooking, medicine. Men who had once faced each other as enemies now rode together, guarding their shared community against common threats. And at the center of it all was Nitika's lodge, its walls covered with her paintings, images that captured the beauty of both worlds and the promise of what they might become together. Outside, a sign painted by young Cooper, now a skilled artist in his own right, proclaimed in both English and Apache, "Thunder Creek, where different paths meet." It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was a beginning. A bridge being built one brushstroke at a time by a woman who had transformed the absence of arms into the presence of extraordinary vision.